Marbles, the smallest worlds we ever held. There was a time when entire galaxies could fit in the palm of your hand. You didn't need a screen. You didn't need electricity. Just a small glass sphere, cool to the touch, catching sunlight just right. Inside it, swirls of color that looked like storms, flames, or distant planets suspended in motion. And yet, these tiny worlds weren't meant to be admired alone. They were meant to be risked, because once they hit the ground, once the circle was drawn in dirt, those beautiful little objects became something else entirely. They became stakes, and in a world measured in marbles, you were only as rich as your last shot. Long before notifications and glowing screens dictated how we played, there was a simpler rhythm. Knees pressed into warm dirt, hands dusty, eyes locked onto a small circle scratched into the ground. A quiet tension filled the air. No countdown, no music, just breath, focus, and a flick of the thumb. A sharp click echoed as glass struck glass, clean, precise, final, and in that instant, everything changed. Marbles weren't just toys. They were part game, part currency, part identity. They could be traded, collected, admired, or lost forever. But to understand how something so small could carry so much weight, we have to go back, far beyond playgrounds, beyond childhood as we know it, to a time when the idea of play itself was still taking shape. Because marbles didn't begin as glass. They began as something much more primitive. History. The first spheres. Long before glass blowers shaped molten material into perfect circles, humans were already fascinated by the sphere. Archaeologists have uncovered small, rounded objects in ancient settlements across the world. Clay balls, polished stones, even carved nuts. In regions connected to early civilizations like the Indus Valley, small spherical artifacts suggest that children, or perhaps even adults, engaged in games involving rolling, striking, or aiming. In ancient Rome, children played with clay balls in games that bear striking resemblance to what we would later recognize as marbles. These weren't toys in the modern sense. They were simple objects shaped by hand, imperfect, uneven, but full of possibility. There is something universally compelling about a sphere. It moves, it reacts, it invites interaction. And for thousands of years, that was enough to spark play. From clay to culture. As societies evolved, so did the objects they played with. In medieval Europe, clay marbles became more common. These were handmade, rolled between palms, fired in simple kilns, and used in local games that varied from village to village. They were rarely perfect. Edges might be slightly flat, surfaces rough, but perfection wasn't the point. Each marble carried the mark of the person who made it, and games began to take on structure. Circles drawn in dirt, targets set, rules agreed upon, sometimes strictly, sometimes loosely. More importantly, value entered the equation, because when you play for keeps, every object matters. Lose, and it's gone. Win, and your collection grows. Even at this early stage, marbles were more than objects. They were part of a system, an economy built on skill, chance, and trust. Fire and glass, the German transformation. The real transformation came in the 19th century. Deep in the forested regions of Germany, particularly in Lauscha, glassblowers began experimenting with something new. Glass was already being used for ornaments and small decorative items. But shaping it into tiny, near-perfect spheres required extraordinary precision. Molten glass had to be cut, rotated, and cooled at just the right moment. The result was something remarkable. Glass marbles, clear, smooth, luminous. Inside them, artisans created patterns, ribbons of color twisted into spirals, clouds of pigment suspended like smoke. Each marble became a miniature work of art. No two were exactly alike. These handmade marbles spread quickly across Europe and into international markets. They weren't just playthings anymore. They were objects of beauty, objects of desire. And for the first time, marbles began to blur the line between toy and collectible. The machine age. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, industrialization reshaped everything, including marbles. In the United States, inventors developed machines capable of producing glass marbles at unprecedented speed and consistency. Factories began to replace artisans. Molten glass could now be cut into uniform segments, rolled into spheres, and cooled in controlled environments. Companies like Acro Agate, Peltier Glass, and Christensen Agate became leaders in this new industry. Designs became more standardized, but no less mesmerizing. Cat's eye marbles appeared with colored veins trapped inside clear glass. Swirls, ribbons, opaque designs, each type had its own identity, and most importantly, marbles became accessible, no longer rare imports or handmade curiosities. They were everywhere, affordable, abundant, ready to be played with. The playground economy. From the 1920s through the 1950s, marbles reached their peak. This was their golden age. Children carried them in small cloth bags, pockets, even metal tins. They knew the names: ringers, taws, steelies, aggies. Each type had its purpose. Each had its value. Games weren't just casual. They were competitive, strategic, sometimes ruthless. A circle would be drawn in dirt, marbles placed inside. Players took turns shooting from the edge, trying to knock others out. And often, these games were played for keeps. Lose, and those marbles were no longer yours. That's what gave the game its intensity, because every shot carried consequence. You had to decide, do you use your best shooter? Do you risk it all? Or do you play safe and hope for opportunity? It wasn't just about aim, it was about judgment. And for many children, it was their first experience with risk and reward. Design, identity, and obsession. As production grew, so did variation. Collectors began to notice differences, subtle variations in color, pattern, clarity. Some marbles became rare, others common. A hierarchy formed, and children, without realizing it, became curators. They sorted, compared, traded. They learned value, not from instruction, but from experience. A certain swirl might be worth 3 commons. A rare handmade piece? Untouchable? You didn't just play marbles. You built a collection, and that collection told a story. Nostalgia and lived experience. There's a memory many people share, not of winning, but of losing. That one marble, the favorite, the one that felt just right in your hand. You line up the shot, you take your time, you flick, and it misses. Or worse, it hits, but rolls just slightly out of reach. And just like that, it's gone. You watch someone else pick it up. There's a moment where you want to argue, to take it back, but you don't, because the rules mattered. That's what made it real. There was no reset button, no undo, only the next game. And somehow that made every moment sharper, every win sweeter, every loss unforgettable. Decline and replacement. As decades passed, the world changed. Television entered the home, then video games, then computers, then phones. Play moved indoors. It became faster, brighter, more immediate. Marbles didn't vanish overnight. They simply faded. Playgrounds changed too. Less dirt, more concrete, less free-form play, more structured activity. And marbles, dependent on space, time, and patience, no longer fit as easily. They became relics, collected rather than played, preserved rather than risked. But marbles never truly disappeared. They still exist, in collections, in antique shops, in the hands of glass artists who continue to push the boundaries of what these tiny spheres can be. And maybe that's fitting, because marbles were never just about the game. They were about what the game represented. Choice, risk, value. They taught lessons without words. You learned by playing, by winning, by losing, and, maybe most importantly, by caring about something small, something simple, something real. Because once, not so long ago, an entire world could fit in your pocket, and all it took to change everything was a single flick of your thumb.